You know, what's really nice, Tony, is that they've been up on the church website.
Yeah,
When you go to their YouTube. So if we miss the Sunday school, which I did, it's really nice to be able to hear those presentations.
yeah, it's good. I mean, it's worked out a lot better than we thought it would.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot that we didn't think we were going to learn. I mean, we never imagined seeing each other like, look at the pictures like this. So it's been a difficult time, but a challenging time. So John, how are we getting our speaker?
I'm just waiting for him to log on. He has the link.
He has to log on.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just waiting for him.
Okay.
John, this is Lazy. I was going to tease you clergy about having Sunday off because you're doing all your work ahead of time, but here you are at the podium, so to speak. So we're glad to see you.
Well, you know, it somewhat feels like that because my sermon was done on Wednesday, but
Y'all are going to have to get used to working on Sunday again.
I know, and that's coming soon. The plan is for us to start live streaming the 11 o'clock service on the 17th. And we'll keep pre-recording the 9:45 service for the time being. So we'll see.
Is that going to be outside?
The 11 o'clock service will just be live streamed with nobody in it except the worship leaders. Won't be
Okay.
with the congregation.
Down there? Yeah. That's Missy and John. I know. Joe Grooves. This is a big group.
uh-huh.
And you got a bigger screen TV.
We may be playing trivia here. Hopefully, we're gonna be.
They're the Yarboroughs.
You got Rizwan's number?
I do.
I may too.
I'd ring him.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, John, Missy,
Hi.
nice paintings behind you.
How about that?
They came to see us yesterday.
Mother's Day.
Yes.
We talked for, they were on the Greenway and we were up in the parking lot.
You don't have to be quarantined?
No, we didn't get close to them. They drove from Myrtle Beach and Hendersonville and converged at noon, and we spoke across the distance for 5 minutes, and then they went home. Birthday and Mother's Day bracketed it.
Happy birthday, John. Hope you enjoyed it.
Surprise. Wonderful surprise.
Right.
Lacey, are you eating oatmeal?
I'm eating bananas and Special K. Breakfast. I got up a little late this morning.
It doesn't matter.
Here's Rizwan.
Oh, good. I was just texting him. Good.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to you. Glad to have you. We're so glad you could be with us today. You see all of our pictures?
Better for worse.
I am working on it. A few of these here. Yes, somewhat. I think if I change the settings. Yes, I see. I see.
Okay.
There are 20 some people. Is that right?
You can hear his voice if you just talk.
Good.
Yeah.
All right.
Hi, Ben.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir, we can.
All right. All right. So shall we begin? Because we have an hour.
No, I was not asked to do this.
Tony, do you want to introduce and say a little bit real quickly before we start?
I wasn't prepared to do so, but I'd be glad to do so. What's your rank now? Are you associate professor?
I'm associate. Yes, I'm associate.
So Rizwan Zamir is associate professor of religious studies at Davidson College. And he had agreed before everything collapsed into the coronavirus to do a class. I think it was going to be 2 or 3 weeks earlier than this on some aspect of Islam. And now we've sort of changed the class back to more of a general introduction to Islam, because I think people really need that, because there are a lot of people that really don't know that much. And so we're very grateful to you for educating us and for being willing to be part of this. And we thank you for being here and look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Thank you. So let me begin. I think a few preliminary remarks. It's a very challenging task. In some ways, I don't feel very good about like a 1 hour introduction to Islam. And I'll just tell you why, because it tends to be too generalized. That's one. We're talking about 1400 years of history of a tradition. Over 2009 Pew Forum had it 1.57 billion people. This is 2020. This may even be 1.7, 1.8 billion people. We're looking at the largest Muslim country being Indonesia, which really comes up in people's mind when they're thinking about Islam. They're thinking about the Arab world. They really think, or Indian subcontinent, where I come from, like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. If you think about largest single ethnic group of Muslims in the world, again, people may be surprised. They are actually Bengalis, 145 million. That was back in 2009. Bangladesh, present-day Bangladesh, which used to be part of India until partition of 1947. So, and then you have Africa, the North Africa, and you have like Bosnia and Albania, and some Muslim communities. Historic, good 400, 500 years of Muslim communities, even in Europe. So China, there are estimates between 20 million and 100 million Chinese Muslims, not ethnically Chinese, all of them, but inside China, and there are ethnic Chinese as well, very early in. So there's much diversity that we're talking about. And in terms of ethnicity, languages, we're talking about 52 states, which are predominantly or majority Muslim. So all of that, and then you get this little 1 hour of introduction to Islam. It's like, sure, let's do it. So then you have to see, all right, what are our possibilities? What different ways we can go about doing that? And so I have, since 2002, when I came here as an undergraduate, right after 9/11, I think this is like one of the things I've been doing. Churches, classrooms. I was the token Muslim at James Madison University. Right after 9/11, got invited to churches to speak about it, because I came in January 2002. So of course, everyone wanted to know more about it, and there were not many Muslims who would be willing to do that. So I've done it for quite a while, for good 18 years in almost most of these churches around Davidson. I've given these talks. So here's what I've resolved to, and this is like, I think this is the longest gap I've had in giving a talk like this, which is 4 or 5 years. In 4 or 5 years, I've not been to a church. Or not been to a church speaking to the congregation. I've been to DCPC for Davidson Learns classes, and I see a couple of people from Davidson Learns here. So what I think is the best, which is I like to not simplify what is a very complicated tradition and cannot but be complicated. Talk about Sunni Shia divide. I think originally when Tony Abbott approached me, I was thinking about, because this was my Shiite Islam heavy semester after 5 years. I'm doing two classes. One is comparison of Catholicism and Shiism, and the other one is that's kind of interreligious conversation. And then I was doing intra-religious, Sunni and Shiite Islam. I'm teaching these two classes side by side. So that was more intra-religious and inter. So I thought I'll do an overview of the major Sunni Shia divide within Islam and what the implications are. But then it became more, because that class got canceled, and now we're doing more basic introduction. So my best bet is to show you, first I'll tell you a little story. And then after that story, it will come another story as a text. So that one little text, which I used last time I taught Introduction to Islam as a course, that was 2012, I think. When I taught that, we spent 4 months on this one page. So I'm just going to spend 40 minutes on one page instead of 4 months on that one page. But that one page is a good window into the basics, kind of an overview of Islamic practices, Islamic faith, meaning how do Muslims see the world, what's important in the world, and what do they do. So let's begin with a story, and why that story. So this is my best 18 years of doing this. I think this is the best approach to tell you a story which I think people will see certain parallels. I'm assuming DCPC means Christian audience who's familiar with Bible and biblical characters and biblical narratives. So you'll see how Islamic grand story of origins and flow of history has a lot of parallels going on and some strange and interesting twists from the Christian story. So let's begin. Here's the story, and then we'll go to that text. I'll share screen. I'll have you see the text. So quickly, there is one God in the beginning, before time, or once upon a time, before time. There was Allah, which in Arabic simply means the God or the worshipped one. For Muslims, there's only one God, and that God is the Lord of the universe, who is the creator and who is giver of death and merciful and compassionate and just, with justice, all-knowing, almighty, so many of these things. So it's conception of this one God who is the absolute Lord of all things. So creation happens, and with creation, meaning the earth and the skies and everything in between, and the mountains and the animals and the plants and so on and so forth, all of these things are created. And then as kind of pinnacle of creation, the famous phrase is God speaks to angels and says, angels are there, by the way. And there's also another creature which is called jinn, Jinn, from which Aladdin, the genies are all inspired by. This all goes back to the Islamic tradition, actually. The jinn, another beings like human beings who have choice, who exercise choice and free will. Anyhow, so we'll see if they become relevant. So anyhow, God speaks to angels and say, I'm going to create my vicegerent on earth, or my vice regent on earth. And angels say, doesn't seem like a good idea. These people will spread corruption on earth. And God says, I know what you know not. And then Adam is created as God's vicegerent, and all the angels are asked to prostrate before Adam. One of the beings who is not actually an angel, but a jinn, refuses to prostrate and says, I'm made of fire, is made of clay. Why should I do this? So pride is like the fundamental vice of what the character becomes, the Satan, who refuses out of pride, says, I'm not doing this. I'm not prostrating before. Prostration, by the way, for Muslims is the highest act, physical manifestation of servitude to God, for being God's obedient servants. So that's like the highest physical embodiment of that is prostration. So when the jinn is asked, when all the angels are asked to prostrate, people are, Muslims are surprised, like, why would God ask the angels to prostrate before Adam? Because that's something Muslims do towards God. Anyhow, so this is how Adam Adam is created, and then Satan becomes Satan because refuses God's command. And then there is this little like tussle. It says, I will show you what this creature is like. This is not like exactly Quranic verses I'm giving you. I'm giving you a story, but we can, the verse is somewhat different. It says, I'll show you what you're taking pride in this creation. You think this is human being is very special. I'll show you what a disgrace or what a disaster this is. And I will tempt them and I'll make sure that they do not turn out to be obedient servants. So it kind of becomes this kind of battle of good and evil, Satan as a force who's there to misguide or disrupt human beings from becoming God's obedient servants. And so begins, and then comes the next part, which is Eve. The name is never mentioned, but as Adam's wife shows up in the garden where Adam is, and then serpent, that's not a serpent, but same character, the jinn, sort of question, serpent. It's like the same character. Iblis is the name, who becomes the shaitan, Satan, now tempts both of them. Not Eve first and then Adam, and Eve going to Adam, but both of them are tempted in the garden and they eat the fruit and then they're ashamed and then but here's the twist. They then repent. God rebukes them, they repent, and they're forgiven. So there's no idea of this kind of concern of original sin doesn't emerge. They repent and they are forgiven and the key aspect of Adam created to be God's vicegerent on earth, which means they have a mission for earth. It's not they are abandoned or thrown out. They were already created to be stewards or God's representatives on earth. So then they land on earth, and then that begins the children of Adam's story. The Cain and Abel story is there, and then you have, after that point, from the Quranic telling of the origin and flow of history, it's all about certain special beings known as messengers or prophets. So the story of humanity that is told in the Quran is that of story of certain messengers or prophets sent by God to humanity. Many of the well-known names in the Bible are there. So you have Noah, Noah's flood is there, and you have some of the kings, Israelite kings, like David and Solomon. They're also prophets for Muslims in the Quranic telling. But the most central character then becomes after Noah. So you say from Adam, you go to Noah as an important, from Noah, then you go to Abraham as the most important figure. The first person who is called in the Quran Muslim is Abraham. So the story I'm telling you, from the way we'll think about it, right? Islam is a tradition that begins in the 7th century. Muslims don't see it that way. Islam didn't begin in the 7th century. It culminated in the 7th century with the coming of the last prophet. So what we see as like the Islamic, Islam as a religion began in 7th century. It's like, no, Islam began right from the beginning. Muslims only consider it Islam religion. And this is something I want to elaborate on. How does that work? How do they make sense of this? So Abraham is called as the first Muslim within the Quran. Was like and he goes through numerous trials, having to sacrifice his son. Even the story in the Quran, or Muslim understanding, Muslim interpretation of that narrative from the Quran, is that it wasn't Isaac, it was Ishmael. There is the Quran doesn't take up the whole issue of what happened. What you have in Genesis, how Hagar and Ishmael were taken out. I actually had it somewhere. I think there's a passage in the Genesis which speaks of Ishmael. While the covenant is given to Isaac, we say we'll also make him a great nation out of him, and we'll have 12. I think the 12 rulers or 12, the idea of the 12. So make him a special nation basically from his progeny. The Islamic tradition, Quranic telling of the story, sees this quite straightforwardly to be the fulfillment. The Prophet of Islam is a descendant of Ishmael. Arabs are descendants of Ishmael. So Ishmael, and that you may have all seen the cubical building called the Kaaba, Kaaba, where people go for pilgrimage. This year probably it's not happening thus far. It seems like Hajj will not happen, pilgrimage, the annual pilgrimage. So when Abraham takes Ishmael and Hagar and leads them, apparently he leads them in that land, Hijaz, in present-day Saudi Arabia. And then apparently the context continued because they built, when Ishmael grew up a bit, they built that building called the Kaaba, the temple, primordial temple, the primordial worship place. God's house was built by Abraham and Ishmael. And that, and then apparently even in the Bible, Ishmael was present. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Ishmael was present when Abraham died. So there is some sense that the connections continued. And it's the Prophet of Islam is a descendant of Ishmael. So the long reason of telling this story is to say that it doesn't begin in 7th century. It really begins with Abraham as a kind of central character, but even before. But some of the claims go back all the way. It's like, what makes Satan the worst thing ever? Oh, pride, disobedience. And what are the key terms for Islam, the religion's root word itself means submission, and also peace. Both come from the same Arabic root, peace and submission. So submission, Satan became Satan for refusing to submit to God's command. So, those parallels from right in the beginning of the story to like Ishmael's story, and all of these become quite critical. And so from Abraham, then you see these two lines. Isaac is a prophet within the Quran. Ishmael is a prophet within the Quran. And Israelites are talked about. One of the most talked about, perhaps the most talked about prophet in the Quran is Moses. What are the reasons for him to be so important? Numerous parallels between him and the prophet. Leading a nation. Second, bringer of law. The Prophet of Islam also brought law, which is called Sharia. And then certain other parallels. So anyhow, so these prophets are very important characters. So it's not just restricted to, and numerous stories have been told of these previous prophets. Some of them are quite in line with the biblical story. Some of them are not in line with the biblical story. There are slight twists, including Jesus, of course, is a prophet. John the Baptist is a prophet. Zechariah is a prophet. Mary is the only woman mentioned by name within the Quran, and there's a Quranic chapter named after her. So, and numerous miracles of Jesus are there, right there, that he would heal the sick and give life to the dead, and so on and so forth. Things like that. But Quran is adamant that he was not the son of God, but the prophet. So there's a polemic against Christian views within the Quran, but Jesus is a prophet. So it is trying, the Quranic narrative is encompassing of all these prophets that have gone before as an essential component of the Islamic story, which all culminates then with the Prophet of Islam in the 7th century. So is that clear? And if it's seen through this story, you realize why this temple, or it's not, Muslims don't use the word temple, house of God, Kaaba, is so important. That land is blessed according to the Quran. It was the foundation of it was laid by Adam, and then Abraham and Ishmael come and they build this house of God many centuries later. To then the Prophet of Islam making it to be the final house of God, and Muslims go now anywhere between 3 and 5 million Muslims go every year on a pilgrimage to Mecca, the blessed land and the blessed house of God. There are certain rituals that are done during the pilgrimage, which have nothing to do with 7th century, what the Prophet taught, but those were rituals. For example, they run between two hills. So when Muslims go on this pilgrimage, so after many rituals they do, one of them is running between two hills. Now they have, hills are out, they have included as part of the mosque, so they've kind of artificially been included rather than you actually are running between two hills, but they are hills. Now it's kind of inside. They've covered the, and because it's heat, and they've introduced air conditioning in that kind of for ritual purposes. But the idea, why run between these two hills? This is a reenactment of what Hagar had to do when she was struggling to find water for little Ishmael. In the middle of the desert, not finding water, she ran between these two hills 7 times, and then a fountain erupted from earth, and which still goes on, and Muslims bring this special water, blessed water, and bring it back home and to give it to their families. So they are imitating they're reenacting what Hagar had to do, which is again many centuries before the Prophet Islam came. So Islamic tradition sees itself, all of this is to say, it's sort of a continuation of a long series of prophetic missions that begin with Adam, who was the first human being and the first prophet, all the way to Prophet of Islam, and Jesus on the other side, from the Isaac line, so that Muslims acknowledge all of that, except that he's not Son of God. That would not be acceptable. And the Quran explicitly claims against the crucifixion of Christ, saying they thought they had crucified him, that kind of thing. The crucifixion never happened. Muslims predominantly believe that Jesus was taken up to heaven, and moving forward now, let's say now 7th century, the Prophet of Islam is posited as the last prophet that will come to humanity. And after that, there is end of times and judgment day. And by the way, the Quranic scripture, more than any scripture as I know as a religious studies scholar, has descriptions of heaven and hell and apocalypse and end of times more than any other scripture. So it sees itself as the last tradition and also pointing towards the end of times, the apocalypse, and then the judgment day, and descriptions, vivid imagery of the garden and fire, the Muslim words for Arabic words for heaven and hell, the garden and the fire. The garden is heaven and the fire is the hell. So vivid imagery, especially the earliest revelations, earliest chapters, are full of that imagery, how the world would end, how the mountains will fly like poppies and so forth. It's very thick, and it's all over the Quran. It's not confined to one place. So moving forward, let's say we come to 7th century, the last prophecy, but moving forward in that apocalypse, just to complete the story, it's like, where's the climax? So the climax will be that Jesus returns from the Isaac line, and one of the descendants of the prophet from the Ishmaelite line, whose name will be the same name as Prophet Islam's name, Muhammad, and in a world full of oppression and injustices and so on and so forth, they will fight the battle of good and evil will happen, and eventually peace and order and justice will be restored, and they will reign for a little bit. And then the creation will be rolled up, literally like rolled up. It will all be over, and then there's a judgment day, and every soul shall be judged for what he or she has done or not done. And scales will be drawn, and people's good and bad deeds will be put on scales and see which side is heavy or not. And then intercession or no intercession of the prophets. People may gather behind their own prophet. So Jesus' community will gather behind Jesus, and Abraham's community will gather behind Abraham, so on and so forth. And intercession is a debate like another monotheistic, Judaism and Christianity. Like, is there intercession in religion? Can someone else get you saved, get you forgiven, things like that? And eventually there's garden and fire, and expressions are varied, and discussions happen whether it's eternal life, eternal hell, eternal garden, or for some time, then not, and so on and so forth. So this is how it all concludes. So that's the story. Now, why do I tell this? I say this is the story that orients Muslims. When we talk about history is plugged into this myth. This is the story that Muslims are living. And much of what is claimed, much of what happens from day to day, for example, when someone dies in a Muslim household, or if you hear a Muslim hears like someone has died, what do they say? What happens? What's the first response, religious response to someone's death? The Quranic formula, it's a Quranic line. It says, indeed, verily, or indeed, from God we have come, and unto him we shall return. So the idea that life, we have come from God and we return to him, will not make sense unless we know the story. So human beings have come to this world, and all the discussion of what we call eschatology, study of eschatology, study of the end, the Quranic and the Islamic intellectual term, meaning the science that for study of eschatology is called the return. It's all about the return. It's the idea we've come from another world and we return back to it. So in a certain sense, we're not going forward, we're returning. The idea of return is again very much tied to the story. To talk about returning is to talk about like the origin first. Like, do we come from somewhere? And all of this, one more important point that needs to be made, because I just noticed it's called the covenant class. So I don't know why it's called the covenant class, but there is a notion of covenant, right? The covenant that the Jews had with God and the covenant. And I just cited for you the Genesis discussion of Ishmael. It says the covenant goes to Isaac. So Ishmael doesn't get the covenant. He gets everything else. He gets like, we make a great nation out of you, and you'll have like 12 rulers and so on and so forth. But it doesn't get, I'll actually read it to you. I pulled it up. I can find it. Yeah, here we go. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. So that's what I'm talking about. This is Genesis 17, chapter 17, verses 20 and 21. Is that clear? So the idea that Ishmael is there, but the covenant doesn't go to him. So within the Quran, you actually have another covenant mentioned, which is for Muslims, the primordial covenant. It makes no distinction between who's Jewish and who's not Jewish and who's from whom. This is covenant, God's covenant with all of humanity in the world of spirits, even before we were embodied and we came to planet Earth. So all humanity in the world of spirits, before being embodied, were asked, am I not your Lord? And they all said, yes, you bear witness. So God is the Lord is the primordial covenant written on every soul. So that covenant kind of trumps every other covenant from the Muslim standpoint. Every other covenant. I mean, Muslims do think there was a covenant that Israelites had with God, yes, but Islamic tradition is built much more on this primordial covenant, and we see itself as this primordial tradition. So, is all of this clear? It's like a very sweeping overview of it, but it's through this overview, what I call the orienting tale. This is the tale, this is the story that orients Muslims in time and space. So then you ask, why do they go for pilgrimage? It has a lot to do with the story. Why certain months are more important than other months? Why certain time of the year is more important than other times? Much of that is related to this story, but then we can come to look at more hands-on, because then there'll be an interplay between a kind of 101, now we call Islam 101, and its relationship to that story. So if you're ready, is there any questions you want to ask about what I've just said? This may be a good time, and I'm going to get to that text and spend another 15 minutes quickly on that text. The very text I spent 4 months on. We'll just spend 15 minutes, give you an overview. So, any questions? You have to unmute if there's a question. I don't know how this will work, but am I live on YouTube? I just noticed. I've never been live on YouTube. I hope it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Anyhow, any questions? No? Should I go ahead and share the document then? All right. So let's try this. First, all right, do you see a text? Yes, in front. All right. So don't go ahead of me. Don't read ahead of me. So there's Arabic on the next page. Just read. So I'm going to tell you now another story, a quick one, and then we'll come back to this text. And then the rest will be a little bit of commentary on the text. So here, this is what happens. 7th century talking about 7th century, the Prophet of Islam. I don't say his name because if you say his name, you will see in the text, there is a blessing that is sent unto him. You have to say that, so that's why I avoid his name. When I say the Prophet of Islam, I hope it's clear who I'm talking about, right? So the story, he was born in 570 and he leaves this world in 632, right? So that's the timeline we're talking about. 570 to 632 is his lifespan, and 610 to 632 is actually when he prophesizes, or he brings, when the Quranic verses happen and he goes and proclaims it to the Arabs in the region, which means present day Mecca. That's where he begins. And Medina is the second city on the western end of present day Saudi Arabia. So you have those two cities. That's the origin of the story. So 610 is when he starts. The Quranic revelations come to him through Gabriel. And then for next 23 years, these revelations keep coming, and the Quran becomes a compilation of these series of revelations that came over a period of 23 years, from 610 to 632, right? So that's the timeline. Now, in between, towards the end, some people claim, I don't know exactly what time period this happens, but there is this episode that happens, that he is sitting with his disciples. The Prophet of Islam is sitting with some of his disciples, and a person, the Arabic word is like suddenly appears, just like the sun rises, just like that. So this person suddenly appears, and please try to think of it as like a very small tribal community. So everybody knows everybody in the tribal setting. Strangers are so easily identified if you're not from there. So a person appears suddenly and comes, and the reporter, the person who's reporting this, one of the companions of the Prophet, one of the disciples, and he says he had no mark, had a very white clothing and jet black hair, no mark of travel. So first thing notice, like he had no mark of travel. So it's like it's supposed to be a traveler, but had no mark of travel. And his clothes are very white, which means no dust, and it's like, same thing. So the person comes and sits right next to the Prophet, puts his knees, touching his knees, and then he puts his hands on his knees and asks him a question. Says, what is Islam? First question. So you have these highlighted items in the text. The first one I've highlighted. He says, what is Islam? The Prophet gave an answer. And the person says, yeah, that's right. And everyone's shocked. Like, he's supposed to be the Prophet. Who is this guy who just randomly comes, asks him a question, and then says, you're right. And he gives an answer, says, yes, you're right. Then he asks him another question. He said, what is faith? The word translated as faith. And he gives another answer. He says, faith is da 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 da. He says, all right. I said, yeah, that's right. So again, people are very intrigued. We don't know this person. Where did that come from? And he has the audacity to ask him these questions and then to tell him that he's right. And then he asks, like, so what is virtue? Or what is goodness? There are different translations. The word for good and beautiful, by the way, in Arabic is the same, which means ethical and the aesthetic are navigated from the same criteria, good and beautiful. So it says, like, what is goodness? What is wholesomeness? Or what is beautiful? Or what is virtue? Same ethical, right? And then he gives an answer. And at that point, then he says, like, tell me about the hour, with a capital H, meaning the end of time. Tell me about the hour. And he said, I don't know. I know as much as you know, or we both know, don't know, or we both know, little kind of mysterious answer. He said, but what about its marks? Tell me about its signs. What are the signs of the end? And he gives this very mysterious, enigmatic answer. He says, the slave girl will give birth to her mistress, and you'll see the barefoot, the naked, the destitute, and the shepherds buying and building. It's a very mysterious, enigmatic answer. The slave girl will give birth to her mistress. This is not the normal order of things. The barefoot, the naked, the destitute, and the shepherds will be buying and building. That's the mark of the end. So some strange phenomena will be happening. That's marks of the end. And then the man just goes away. All right, so we'll come back to just the last part. Don't read ahead of me. I keep saying it, don't you have the text. So go back now and look at the answer. And I say, this is Psalm 101 contained in one page text. And I spend each one of this item that we'll see now. I just spend a good bit of time in my classes on this to go at length with this stuff. So first thing when he comes and he asks, he says, tell me, Muhammad, about submitting, meaning Islam. So see, the word Islam on the one hand, we translate as this religion. Another way it means it's already part of a three-part religion. So we'll come back to it. Islam is one part of what is Islam. So this is what I'm trying to show, that Islam is one piece of, if you cut the slice, like this is 3-slice pizza. You've got like one slice is Islam. There are 2 other slices here. And we have to distinguish Islam in this particular sense. So this Islam is a religion, and this is like a good description of the different aspects of it. But within that, there is an aspect called Islam. So he asks, he says, tell me about Islam. He says, submitting is that you bear witness that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. This first line, if anyone wants to become a Muslim, that's the baptismal rite. You first say this in front of 2 adult Muslim witnesses, one becomes a Muslim. There is no God but God, or no God, small g, but God. Do you all see it, by the way? Do I need to make it bigger? Is this all right? I'm here right now. Submitting is that you bear witness. Do you see my cursor? Yeah. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. So if anyone intends to become a Muslim, once one is convinced of this and can say that in front of 2 adult witnesses, one becomes a Muslim. Is that clear? So that's the heart of it. A statement, and think about this. It's not a faith statement, it's a reality statement. It's like a factual statement. It's like no God but God, Muhammad is God's messenger. That's done. That's what it means to be Muslim. Then you have 4 other things. You perform the ritual prayer. This refers to the 5 daily prayers that Muslims do. Right now, first one is at 5 in the morning. The second one will be at 1:25 p.m. Third one will be around 3:30 or so. Then sunset time, just around sunset, you have the 4th prayer. And as the night begins, when it's completely dark, begin early times of complete darkness. 5 daily prayers across the board, 1.56 billion people, no exceptions made, except for certain denominations that may not, or sects that may not have a different interpretation of it. But by and large, this is a standard practice across the board, no exception made. Clear? 5 daily prayers. So first one was this: how do you become a Muslim? Doctrinal understanding, no God but God, there's only one God, and Muhammad is God's messenger. But then the ritual prayer, that's the daily 5 ritual prayers. Then you have pay the alms tax. Look at the word alms and tax together. This is not charity. Muslims make a clear distinction between charity and this is religious tax of sorts. This like, and it's calculated in different ways. Savings, income, usually income after one has paid off all that one's expenses are. There's a certain amount that is given in God's way. Well, it's a tax you pay to God. It's not a tax you pay to a state. It's a tax you pay to God. But how do you pay it? Then it goes into, for example, helping the orphaned and the needy and building hospitals and that kind of stuff, all that we call social initiatives, social work kind of stuff, or paying fee for poor students, things like that. So that alms tax, what's the word tax? The term for charity is sadaqah, which is over and beyond this. This is required. This is not optional. Like 5 daily prayers are required. They're not optional. If you feel like it, you can pray. If you feel like it, don't. So this is alms tax. So that's another one. And then this is already happening as we speak. Fast during the month of Ramadan. So I am right now fasting because this is the month of Ramadan. So again, 1.5 billion or 1.7 billion people are fasting right now across the Muslim world. If you are a pious Muslim, you do this, it's required by law. So month of Ramadan, which is happening right now, we are at day 15th or 16th right now. So from the dawn or pre-dawn, again, from like 5 o'clock, when the first prayer happens, all the way till sunset, which is around 8:30 right now. No food, no drinking, nothing goes inside your mouth. No sex, no smoking, no water, no food every day. At 8:30, you break your fast, and then you begin again at 5 in the morning.